In 1945, when Japan surrendered to the Allies, Vietnam stood at a major historical crossroads. Would it follow the path of Republican revolution or retain the monarchy with constitutional reforms? What would have happened if Emperor Bảo Đại had not abdicated? If a modern constitution had emerged and Vietnam entered the post-colonial era as a constitutional monarchy? Could there have been a democratic, neutral, industrialized, and prosperous Vietnam? Rivaling Japan or Thailand, or was that just a historical illusion? In this hypothetical journey, let's open up a parallel scenario. A Vietnam that still kept the throne but with power in the hands of the people. A country developing through peace, reform, and international cooperation. This is not a regret, but an exercise for the imagination. A historical experiment to better understand what was lost and what could still be done. In August 1945, after Japan's surrender to the Allies, a profound power vacuum appeared in Vietnam. The Japanese Empire withdrew its troops, the French protectorate apparatus, and the Nguyen dynasty, with the abdication of Emperor Bảo Đại, officially ended its role as the last feudal dynasty of the nation. Vietnam stood at a historical fork, either becoming a democratic republic led by the Viet Minh, or another form of state, even a constitutional monarchy, if historical conditions had been different. In reality, the August Revolution succeeded quickly due to the Viet Minh's timely capture of popular support and exploitation of the post-war chaos. However, in the parallel historical stream we imagine, a different scenario can be envisioned. If domestic and international political forces had chosen a more conciliatory model, a Japanese-style constitutional monarchy, Vietnam might have followed a completely different development path. At that time, the Vietnamese people were in a very special state of mind. After nearly 100 years of French colonial domination, the national psychology was not only a desire for, but also a need for a form of social organization that could connect tradition with modernity. Emperor Bảo Đại, though the last king of the Nguyen dynasty, unexpectedly emerged as a figure capable of mediating between the past and the future. He advocated peacefully, handing over the imperial seal and sword to the new government's representative, an act highly appreciated by both the people and the international. This made his image in the eyes of the people and the world non-hostile, and could even become a symbolic figure of transition. In that context, the United States, with its strategy of containing communism in Southeast Asia, had determined that maintaining a pro-Western constitutional monarchy would benefit a regional balance of power. They might have supported the establishment of a constitutional assembly under the Nguyen dynasty's patronage. This model would have been similar to post-war Japan, where the emperor retained the throne with no real power, while the entire executive and legislative systems were elected and executed by Britain, France, and even the Republic of China, which were competing for influence with the communists, also had reasons to support this model. The next condition was temporary consensus among domestic political forces. If organizations like the Vietnamese Nationalist Party, VNQ, Nui Van Party, intellectual associations, religious sects, Buddhism, Taoism, and even some intellectuals within the Viet Minh accepted a middle way model where power was constitutionally defined, separation of powers institutionalized, and a provisional civilian government could have emerged. This government's first task would have been to organize a constitutional assembly, an election under international supervision. This assembly would draft a new constitution, clearly stipulating the symbolic role of the royal family, civil liberties, the right to association, freedom of speech, and decentralization between central and local authorities. The presence of a king, like Bảo Đại, would not be for ruling but as a symbol of unity, connecting diverse religious, cultural, and regional communities in a country as varied as Vietnam. In this scenario, armed conflict between the central government and the Viet Minh could have been limited, if the Viet Minh were recognized as a legal party within the parliamentary system. This has happened in countries like Thailand or Japan, where opposing political forces exist within a framework of institutional. Instead of the Indochina War lasting for decades, Vietnam could enter a period of relative stability, focus on post-war reconstruction and economic development. Of course, all hypotheses must be tied to historical logic. What makes a constitutional monarchy model capable does not lie in the individual case, but in the consensus of the elites, the people, and especially the absence of armed intervention from outside. If China did not send troops into North Vietnam, if France did not reoccupy, and if the US leaned towards a neutral government model rather than supporting France's retreat, then that window of history may have opened. In the next part, we will envision the formation of a nation, a constitutional monarchy of Vietnam. Who holds the power to run a country? Who establishes the constitution? And how will political forces assign their roles? We will follow the first steps of a modern Vietnamese state. Not through war, but through constitutional provisions and agreements. Because, in history, there are moments that it chosen differently.
Not by guns and bullets, but by social contracts, an entire century could have changed direction.
After the initial platform was approved with international recognition and the commitment to cooperation for domestic forces, Vietnam is entering a new. The establishment of a constitutional monarchy was a pivotal moment in the predetermined course of history, where political forces must relinquish their ambition to monopolize power in order to jointly design a new political order. At the center of that process was the Constitutional Assembly, the body empowered to draft the first constitution of the new Vietnamese state. In the context of the peak decade of the ninth invasion of the 40s, typical models can influence Vietnam.
S. Reforms, Thailand.
From these models, the Vietnamese National Assembly built a constitution that emphasized three main pillars, with a king as the symbol of national. The National Assembly is the highest authority, and the government elected by the National Assembly is responsible for managing the country. In the new power structure, Emperor Bảo Đại became the head of state but held no actual executive power. He represents the nation in diplomatic ceremonies and promulgates decrees upon the proposal of the government in the National Assembly. He holds an overarching role in the Prime Minister's inauguration ceremony, but does not.
Like Emperor Hirohito after 1945, he was the continuity of the nation, not the center of power.
The government is established by the National Assembly, an elected body with representatives from different political parties. In this scenario, Vietnam can have at least 5 major parties, with Viet Minh representing the social.
VNQDN,
Nationalism, People's Holy Party, Intellectual Reform, Peasant Worker Alliance. And representatives of religion, Sao Dai, Buddhism, Christianity. A proportional or semi-proportional system would ensure that small parties still have a voice in parliament. The Prime Minister will be the head of the party or coalition holding the majority of seats and has the task of forming a cabinet and governing the country. This is the state where political agreements become tools for maintaining stability rather than conflict. Positions such as Minister of Defense, Minister of Education, the Minister of the Interior will be selected by agreement of the coalition parties, reflecting pluralism and a mechanism of checks and balances in the parliamentary system. In addition, an independent judiciary is emphasized as a barrier to prevent abuse of power. The Constitutional Court was established to oversee the constitutionality of laws and executive decisions. Supreme Court judges are not appointed by the king but are selected by a judicial council, avoiding the interference of both the executive and legislative branch. A special feature of this model is the role of religious forces in civil society. In the context of Vietnam's multi-religious landscape, organizations such as Buddhism, Catholicism, will be recognized as legal communities with a voice in public life. They may have representation in parliament or serve as ethical advisors for public policies.
This is similar to the Thai model, where the state religion of Buddhism plays a role in preserving culture and public ethics.
The military issue was handled as follows. The unified military force, ethnicized, not dependent on any political party. The Ministry of Defense will be under the close supervision of the National, and the appointment of senior generals must be approved by a Legislative Security Council.
The ideal is to build a model military like Japan's self-defense forces or Sweden, where the military is professional and serves the nation rather than political factions.
Police and domestic security systems were also reformed, placed under civilian control mechanisms. The establishment of an independent national investigative agent
helps ensure that legal violations, including those from the government, are handled fairly and transparently.
Another notable point is the rise of locality. In the constitutional monarchy model, Vietnam redivided administrative units into semi-autonomous provinces, with their own people's councils permitted to manage local budgets, and having the right to establish educational policies suitable to local cultural, geographical, and this helps reduce the burden on the central government and facilitates diversity and development. With this structure, Vietnam avoids the risk of revolutionary monopoly and forms a society with substantive mechanisms for checking and supervising power. However, as in any transitional society, challenges always remain latent. Will political parties be mature enough to avoid plunging into conflicts of interest? Will the military truly stay out of politics? Will the people who lack democratic experience be capable enough to participate in social oversight? The answer will be partially revealed when Vietnam enters the constitutional building period of 1947 and organizes the first nationwide election, a turning point to establish the foundation of the country's modern institutions in 1947. After nearly 2 years operating the temporary mechanism of a young constitutional,
Vietnam entered a pivotal stage, organizing the first parliamentary election in modern history to pass the official constitution. This period marked the transition from a provisional legal framework to a stable rule of law, with HEP laying the foundation for the entire future political, executive, and judicial systems. The Provisional Parliament, with representatives from political parties and religions, established a 21-member constitutional drafting committee, including legal scholars, Western-educated intellectuals, religious representatives, and representatives of workers. Best post-World War II constitution and partly Britain, with key principles.
Sovereignty belongs to the people, clear separation of powers, and inviolable individual freedoms. The king is a unifying symbol without administrative involvement. The judicial system is absolutely independent, protecting political and religious pluralism.
A special feature of this process was its openness and transparency. The entire discussion process was widely published in contemporary media such as newspapers, radio, and public forums.
Literate citizens could send petitions to the committee. In villages, community discussion organizations were established to receive feedback from the people. This practice, though novel, helped shape democratic thinking early on for the middle class and young intellectuals.
The Constitution was completed in late 1946, widely announced in early 1947, and prepared for a national referendum.
In the Constitution's content, provisions on human rights, association rights, protest rights, gender equality rights, education rights, and labor protection rights were particularly emphasized, ahead of many Asian countries at the time. The state committed to no discrimination based on religion, ethnicity, origin, or region, and strictly prohibited any form of dictatorship in the name of revolution.
In May 1947, the first general nationwide election was held. With supervision from observers from Sweden, India, and the International Red Cross, this was one of the rare free elections in post-war Asia.
Voter turnout reached 67%, an impressive figure given that many areas still had limited information access. As a result, no party gained a majority, leading to the formation of a ruling coalition between the Reformed Viet Minh, separated from the Long Wang, the Duy Dan Party, and Catholic representatives. Mr. Tran Van Hu, an intellectual trained in France with ideas balancing reform and tradition, was trusted by Parliament to become the first Prime Minister of the new Vietnam. Immediately after the government was established, the Constitution was officially promulgated with nationwide effect.
Constitution Day became a national holiday, Civil Rights Day, celebrated annually to emphasize the supreme role of law and people's participation in shaping institutions.
The court system was established at all three levels: first instance, appellate, and supreme. The Constitutional Court was granted the power to nullify laws conflicting with the Constitution, even those issued by the government or Parliament. The National Lawyers' Council, a non-governmental organization, was also established to advise, supervise, and educate the entire Also in 1947, the first press law was passed. The press was protected as a constitutional right, able to critique the government and powerful individuals without fear of suppression. Law schools, policy research institutes, and political debate centers were established in Hanoi, Hue, and Saigon. Becoming cradles for cultivating legal thinking in a new generation of intellectuals. Additionally, the government also passed a national education law, stipulating free universal education up to grade 9, introduced civic law and constitutional rights into the secondary education curriculum. This is a long-term preparation to build a society that knows the law, understands the law, and can monitor power with reason, not with the crowd. With the birth of the Constitution, parliamentary system, courts, free press, and liberal education, Vietnam not only avoided bloody civil wars but also surpassed many Asian countries institutionally. While countries like China entered civil war, Korea was divided, and Indochina fell into resistance. Vietnam in this parallel historical stream became a rare example of peaceful and civilized institutional transformation. However, entering the next phase, the Vietnamese government will face other challenges. Post-war economic recovery, poverty alleviation, and building independent industrialization. In 1948, Vietnam under a stable constitutional monarchy model entered a phase of economic recovery and development. After decades of resource exploitation by French colonists and severe consequences from World War II and the 1945 famine, the national economy fell into a state of exhaustion. Over 70% of the population still lived in poverty, illiteracy, infrastructure was heavily destroyed, and indigenous industry was almost non-existent. The new government, run by a coalition of parties, clearly defined a long-term strategy to build an industrialization foundation oriented towards autonomy and sustainability, with land reform, education, and finance as three breakthrough points. First was the land issue. The government enacted the Land Reform Act in early 1948, a revolutionary but not extreme law. Simultaneously, a national land bank was established to provide credit for farmers to buy fields. This created a large middle peasant class, the backbone of agricultural society transitioning to industry. Next was financial reform. Vietnam established an independent central bank separate from the government, tasked with issuing currency, controlling inflation, and maintaining stable exchange rates. The new currency, the Viet Kim, was pegged to the British pound in the initial phase to maintain stability. The rudimentary tax system was gradually replaced by personal income tax, corporate tax, and this created revenue for the central budget to invest in infrastructure and education. In the period 1948 to 1955, the government accelerated the national infrastructure restoration. The North-South Highway was upgraded and expanded, stretching from Lang Son to Sea. The Trans-Vietnam Railway was reconstructed with technical assistance from India. The irrigation systems in the Red River Delta and Mekong Delta were expanded to prevent salinity and flood. Strategic seaports like Haiphong, Da Nang, and Saigon were newly invested into surface. A major turning point occurred in 1950 when Vietnam was admitted to the United Nations. This event opened opportunities to access development assistance loans from the World Bank, WB, and the International Monetary Fund. Aid projects from Sweden, Japan, and India began pouring into areas. Public health, basic engineering, and rural development. Simultaneously, the government issued a light industrialization strategy prioritizing consumer goods production and cement, brick and tile, textile, and small machinery factories were built in major urban centers. Hanoi, Hue, Da Nang, and Hoa. The first integrated industrial zones, all in the Thai model, were established in Long Bien, Hanoi, and Tu Duc, Saigon. Also during this period, Vietnam organized annual national fairs both to promote domestic products and attract foreign investment. Japan, on its post-war recovery path, became Vietnam's top trade partner in electronics, construction materials, and farming techniques. Education policy was also a top priority. With the revised education law of 1949, The government set three strategic goals: 100% primary education universalization by 1955, teacher training in all provinces, and building three multidisciplinary national universities in Hanoi, Hue, and Saigon. The education program focused on science and technology, national history, and critical thinking. Textbooks were compiled by the National Institute of Education, which gathered domestic and foreign intellectuals. With a comprehensive strategy, after just 7 years, Vietnam's per capita GDP doubled, the literacy rate reached 68%, and the primary school enrollment rate reached 90%.
Many began calling Vietnam the new rising star of Southeast Asia,
on par with Thailand and Singapore. However, not everything was smooth. Some localities maintained conservative attitudes, hindering land reform. Loan fund management lacked transparency in some places. And most importantly, geopolitical tensions began to emerge as the Cold War heated up in Indochina.
Entering the 1950s, as Western economies recovered thanks to the Marshall Plan, Asia, especially Indochina, became a new front of the Cold War.
With its strategic location between China and the Malay Peninsula, Vietnam became a target for both power poles, the United States and the Soviet bloc. In that context, Vietnam's foreign policy played a vital role in protecting independence, avoiding being drawn into ideological confrontation, and maintaining the internal development path. From the beginning, Vietnam declared a stance of active neutrality, not aligning with any military bloc, but proactively building multilateral diplomatic relations.
This was a strategy learned from Sweden and India, countries pursuing non-aligned policies but still playing important roles in the post-war international order. In 1951, Vietnam became a founding member of the non-aligned movement, along with countries like India, Indonesia, Egypt, and Yugoslavia.
At the 1955 Bandung Conference, Prime Minister Tran Van Hu delivered a speech later widely remembered. "We choose to stand beside humanity, not between the gun barrels." This statement clearly expressed the philosophy of soft diplomacy, based on morality, prioritizing development, and using dialogue as. With the United States, Vietnam established diplomatic relations in 1949, during President Harry Truman. Despite not receiving military aid, Vietnam still accessed USAID technical assistance programs in the fields of healthcare, rural development, education, and telecommunications. The first Fulbright scholarships were awarded to Vietnamese students in 1952, leading a generation of young intellectuals exposed to the West without being drawn into ideological conflicts. With the Soviet Union, Vietnam maintained diplomatic relations at the embassy level since 1950. Although not joining the Comecon bloc, Vietnam still participated in some scientific and technical exchange programs in mechanical engineering and hydropower. The Vietnam Soviet Technical Institute in Bảo Đại was established as a symbol of non-military scientific cooperation. With China, the relationship was cautious. Vietnam recognized the People's Republic of China very early but firmly refused to allow China to establish military bases or deploy advisory forces.
Instead, the two sides engaged in economic cooperation through the Lao Cai Kunming railway line and organized cultural forums to ease anti-Chinese sentiment among some segments of the population.
Additionally, Vietnam actively expanded relations with Nordic and Asian countries. Relations with Sweden, Finland, and Japan were elevated to strategic levels, with the Japanese government supporting Vietnam in the seaport modernization program.
While Sweden funded the construction of public healthcare systems and the largest paper mill in Indochina in Quang Ngai, cooperation with Singapore and Thailand helped expand markets for textile and agricultural exports.
One distinctive feature of Vietnam's foreign policy during this period was the harmonious combination of soft and hard approaches.
In terms of soft power, Vietnam regularly organized regional peace forums, international cultural conferences, and artistic exchanges to promote an image of a peaceful, civilized, and open country.
In terms of hard power, Vietnam maintained an elite defense force capable of protecting its borders without relying on any military allies.
Notably, in 1956, Vietnam proposed the Indochina Neutrality Belt Initiative, a treaty between Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, committing not to allow any foreign military forces on their territories.
This initiative, though not fully implemented due to internal instability in Laos and Cambodia, was internationally praised as a positive effort to maintain regional peace.
Moreover, Vietnam also played a bridging role in East-West dialogues.
At the Geneva Conference in 1954, the Vietnamese delegation served as observers, promoting a non-war stance and opposing the division of territories based on ideology. In subsequent years, Vietnam continuously proposed initiatives on nuclear weapons reduction and promoted cooperation in education and healthcare instead of military aid.
An independent, neutral, and proactive foreign policy helped Vietnam avoid the fate of countries that were divided or drawn into proxy wars like Korea or Laos.
Simultaneously, it also facilitated attracting capital and knowledge from both Eastern and Western sides, creating a stable international environment for developing national strength.
Entering the 1970s, Vietnam under a stable, neutral, and modern constitutional monarchy model reached a relatively golden era.
Human development indicators improved strongly. Per capita GDP reached the threshold of 2,300 United States dollars, the equivalent value at the time, the highest among non-oil producing countries in Southeast Asia. The capital Hanoi became the national administrative and educational center with multidisciplinary universities, strategic research institutes, and a national library system modeled after Japan.
Hue City, as a cultural center, continued to preserve the imperial palace but had now become a venue for regional conferences on culture, heritage, and architecture.
Meanwhile, Saigon rose to become a modern industrial city with electronics and telecommunications export processing zones, financial centers, and stock exchanges.
Vietnam signed free trade agreements with ASEAN countries early on and was a founding member of the East Asian Cooperation Organization, EEO, a regional precursor to later political economic forums. The country was dubbed the Japan of Indochina, not only for its development speed but also for its disciplined social organization, emphasis on education, and ability to combine tradition and innovation.
However, no journey is completely smooth. From the late 1970s to early 1980s, Vietnam began facing major challenges.
Regional development disparities.
While the South benefited greatly from industrial investment and international trade, northern mountainous provinces and the Central Highlands remained poor and lacked infrastructure. The government faced the challenge of budget allocation and solving regional equity issues. Global oil crisis, 1973. Like other industrializing Asian countries, Vietnam was heavily affected by soaring oil prices. A series of small businesses had to close, while the government was forced to restructure heavy industries and focus on energy conservation and renewable energy development.
Resistance from cultural and political conservatives. Despite establishing a stable constitutional monarchy, conservative interest groups of nobility and local factions still existed in parliament and cabinet.
These groups often obstructed comprehensive reform policies on sex education, press freedom, or labor reforms. Regional competition. When Thailand and Malaysia began accelerating industrialization and China opened up in 1978, Vietnam faced a more intense competitive environment in attracting foreign investment and developing high technology.
However, thanks to a solid rule of law, stable society, and open national spirit, Vietnam maintained its neutral position, not being dominated by any political bloc.
Instead, Vietnam became a venue for civilized dialogue between power poles, while also being a destination for many scholars, investors, and politicians wanting to understand the development monarchy model. By 1990 to 1995, as the world entered an accelerated globalization period, Vietnam officially joined the World Trade Organization, WTO, signed a bilateral trade agreement with the United States, and opened its capital market. Stocks of Vietnamese corporations, such as Indochina Textile Company and Quang Tri Energy Group, began appearing on Tokyo and Singapore stock exchanges. Social indicators showed clear progress. Literacy rate reached 97%, multidimensional poverty rate decreased to 8%, female parliamentary participation was 38%, average life expectancy reached 75 years, and the number of scientific research publications in international journals increased 12 times in 20 years. Some international researchers even call Vietnam a tropical Sweden model, referring to its neutrality, welfare, and comprehensive development in an Asian cultural context. However, among all historical hypotheses, this story stops at the word "if," because in reality Vietnam chose a different path, full of blood, tears, sacrifice, and went through war, division, and unification through internal strength and indomitable spirit.
Yes, not like Thailand. And imagining a parallel history is not for regret, nor for denial, but to remind us that if we can freely imagine, we can also confidently create. History cannot be changed, but the future is always there, waiting for us to write together, and precisely from today's ifs, we know we can dream, so that tomorrow we can act.
If the veil stirred, subscribe and meet the next encounter.